The United States of America is not simply a nation born of colonialism and revolution, but a story of power forged from contradictions. A nation founded on the ideals of liberty and the Constitution, yet one that has endured civil wars, racial conflicts, and economic crises that have shaken its foundations. From 13 colonies on the fringes of European empires to the world's greatest political, economic, and military power, the United States has forged its path through bloodshed, innovation, ambition, and division. Its history is not a straight line of progress, but a winding path between principles and interests, between the American dream and its harsh realities, making understanding it key to understanding the modern world itself. Welcome to this new video in our series on the history of North American countries. Christopher Columbus is credited with discovering the New World in 1492, but this discovery was in reality the beginning of contact between two worlds, not the birth of a new world from nothing. When Columbus set foot on the Caribbean islands, specifically Hispaniola, the land was not empty, but inhabited by indigenous peoples with ancient civilizations whose roots extended thousands of years before the arrival of Europeans. Anthropological studies indicate that the first humans reached the Americas via a land bridge that connected Siberia to northwestern America at the Bering Strait during the last ice age. From there, human groups gradually spread throughout the two continents, giving rise to advanced civilizations in South America and remarkable cultures in Central America, alongside the indigenous peoples of the Americas and the First Nations of North America, who developed lifestyles adapted to diverse environments, from forests and plains to deserts and coastlines. Columbus was not, in fact, the first European to set foot in the New World. Viking and Norse voyages to Greenland and parts of present-day Canada had preceded him by centuries. However, his voyage ignited widespread European interest in the New World. News of the Americas' potential riches quickly spread throughout Europe. While many tales of cities of gold and glittering legends were exaggerated, the abundance of natural resources, fertile land, timber, furs and minerals was enough to drive Spain, England, France and Portugal into a frantic race for control and colonization. England sought early on to establish a permanent presence in North America, attempting to create the first settled colony in what is now Virginia. In 1587, over 100 men, women and children sailed to Roanoke Island and established a settlement there. This endeavour, however, ended in historical mystery. The colony vanished entirely after the departure of its governor, John White, who returned to England to procure supplies and was unable to return for 3 years, only to find the place completely deserted. Despite this setback, English ambition did not wane. In the early 17th century, John Smith was sent to establish the Jamestown colony, which paved the way for a wider wave of European settlement. The New World attracted adventurers, those fleeing economic hardship, and those persecuted for their beliefs, as was the case with the Pilgrims who arrived in Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1620. England's inheritance system, which granted land rights only to the eldest son, provided a strong incentive for younger sons to seek a new future across the ocean. By the mid-18th century, European colonies had spread along the eastern coast of North America. It was in this context that George Washington, the young Virginian landowner who had gained military renown during the French and Indian War, 1754-1763, rose to prominence. This war represented a decisive confrontation between French and British influence in North America, ending in a British victory. However, it simultaneously paved the way, both psychologically and militarily, for the outbreak of the American Revolutionary War. As the American colonies grew, became more organized, and their economic power increased, resentment against the British Crown intensified. The colonists were required to pay taxes without having political representation in the British Parliament, a situation widely perceived as blatant injustice. When the Revolutionary War broke out, Washington assumed command of the Continental Army, and the colonists declared their independence in 1776. However, transforming this declaration into a stable democracy required years of debate, culminating in the ratification of the United States Constitution in 1787, with Washington elected as its first president. The peace was short-lived. The War of 1812 erupted between the United States and Great Britain due to trade restrictions and British attempts to curb American expansion. Despite the war's brutality, it ended with a settlement that gradually restored relations between the two nations to a path of alliance. But the 19th century also revealed a darker side to American history. Native Americans were subjected to coercive policies culminating in the Indian Removal Act of 1830 under President Andrew Jackson, and the subsequent tragic March of Tears, during which tens of thousands were forcibly removed from their lands, with thousands more perishing along the way. Meanwhile, slavery persisted in the South, where large plantations relied on slave labor, creating a deep moral and political divide between North and South that would later ignite the American Civil War. The United States entered the most dangerous internal conflict in its history with the outbreak of the American Civil War, a 4-year war between the states beginning in 1861. At its core, the war was a clash between two visions for the country's future: northern states seeking to preserve the Union, and southern states that seceded to form their own entity, known as the Confederate States of America, in defense of their slave-based economic system and states' rights. The war erupted just weeks after Abraham Lincoln became president, when Confederate forces attacked Fort Sumter in April 1861. The confrontation quickly escalated into a full-blown war, marked by brutal battles and the unprecedented use of relatively new military technology for the time, such as railroads and telegraphs. The human toll was enormous. Nearly 750,000 people were killed, either on the battlefield or from disease and inadequate medical care, a number exceeding the total number of American soldiers killed in all other wars combined up to the end of the Vietnam War in 1975. On April 9, 1865, the war effectively ended when Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Union General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia, marking the fall of the Confederacy. The North's victory freed more than 4 million enslaved people, but the end of slavery did not mean the end of injustice. In the decades that followed, the United States entered Reconstruction, a period marked by a profound contradiction. On the one hand, astonishing industrial and scientific progress, and on the other, the persistence of social inequality. The country experienced an innovation boom that transformed lives, with inventions such as the electric light bulb, the telephone, the automobile, the internal combustion engine, the assembly line and the airplane, and the emergence of new consumption patterns like department stores. Despite the United States' transformation into a modern industrial society and a rising global power, African Americans, Native Americans, and women continued to be treated as second-class citizens. Jim Crow laws in the South enforced a strict system of racial segregation that denied black people political and social equality. Although they were granted the right to vote in 1870, many were effectively denied it through discriminatory laws. Women gained the right to vote in 1920, while Native Americans were not granted the right to vote until 1924. Thus, the United States appeared simultaneously progressive and repressive. In the late 1920s, this progress suffered a major setback. On October 24, 1929, the stock market crashed after years of speculation and reliance on borrowed money, plunging the country into the Great Depression. Businesses went bankrupt, unemployment soared to unprecedented levels, and millions lost their life savings. The situation was exacerbated by the dust storm of the early 1930s, a man-made environmental disaster caused by unsustainable farming practices. This storm eroded the soil of the Great Plains and displaced thousands of farming families. Faced with this economic and social collapse, the federal government intervened with extensive reform programs, including Social Security, the Civil Conservation Corps, agricultural relief, and banking reform, in an attempt to restore stability and hope to American society. While the United States was gradually recovering, the world was heading toward a greater conflict. Political turmoil in Europe led to a full-scale war, while Asia was embroiled in a bloody conflict between Japan and China. Although the United States tried to avoid intervention, this neutrality did not last long. On the morning of December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy launched a surprise attack on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, killing more than 2,000 people and destroying a large number of ships and aircraft. In response to this attack, President Franklin Roosevelt declared war on Japan the following day, officially bringing the United States into World War II on the side of the Allied forces. On the home front, American factories were transformed into war machines, and women entered the workforce in massive numbers to keep production lines running. Meanwhile, on the battlefields, American soldiers faced a fierce global war against the Axis powers, a conflict that would redraw the balance of power across the world. During World War II, the Nazi regime perpetrated one of the most horrific crimes in human history, systematically murdering millions of Jews and others in a genocide known as the Holocaust. As Allied forces advanced from the east and west, the German capital Berlin was besieged, and by the spring of 1945 the Nazi regime had completely collapsed. With defeat imminent, Nazi leader Adolf Hitler committed suicide, and Germany formally surrendered on May 8, 1945, ending the war in Europe. However, fighting continued in the Pacific Theatre against Japan. With the land invasion faltering and fearing massive casualties, the United States resorted to a new and unprecedented weapon. On August 6, 1945, the first atomic bomb, developed by a team led by physicist Robert Oppenheimer, was dropped on Hiroshima, followed 3 days later by a second bomb on Nagasaki. The two explosions killed more than 250,000 people, mostly civilians, through immediate death and subsequent radiation exposure. Faced with this unprecedented devastation, the Japanese emperor announced his surrender, officially ending World War II in September 1945. Following the war, the United States entered a period of unprecedented economic and social prosperity. The country experienced tremendous industrial growth, most families owned cars and televisions, and a new popular culture emerged, including rock and roll music. Amidst the Cold War rivalry with the Soviet Union, the United States launched major scientific and military programs, most notably the establishment of NASA and the space race. However, this progress was not universal. Minorities, particularly African Americans, continued to suffer from discrimination and racism. In the 1950s and 60s, the civil rights movement emerged, led by prominent figures, most notably Martin Luther King, Jr., who advocated for equality and an end to segregation. This popular pressure led to the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibited legal discrimination. King's assassination in 1968, however, was a national shock, occurring during a period marked by other political assassinations, most prominently that of President John F. Kennedy. Kennedy in 1963, followed by his brother Robert Kennedy in 1968. The 1960s were an era of profound upheaval and major social transformations. By the end of the 20th century, many believed the United States had entered a period of relative stability, but the morning of September 11, 2001, shattered this feeling. On that day, Al-Qaeda carried out an unprecedented terrorist attack on American soil. 19 members of the organization hijacked 4 civilian airliners. 2 crashed into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York, a 3rd into the Pentagon, and the 4th into Pennsylvania. Thousands were killed, and the country suffered immense psychological and security trauma. In the aftermath of the attacks, President George W. Bush declared what became known as the War on Terror, a war unlike any other, as it was not waged against a specific nation-state, but against transnational networks. The United States led an international coalition to overthrow the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, then invaded Iraq and toppled Saddam Hussein's regime. In 2011, Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden was killed in a special operation inside Pakistan. In June 2011, President Barack Obama announced the start of the phased withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan, and by the end of 2014, combat operations there had officially ended, although security challenges continued. The September 11th attacks had a profound impact on American life, from tightened airport security measures to the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, the proliferation of surveillance systems, and shifts in attitudes toward immigration, along with a wave of nationalism. However, the decades that followed revealed growing political and social divisions within American society, encompassing issues of identity, racial justice, legal and illegal immigration, economic inequality, and the role of the United States in the world. As the second decade of the 21st century dawned, the United States faced a series of crises stemming from the legacy of the War on Terror, beginning with the 2008 global financial crisis, which shattered confidence in the economy and the political system. In the following decade, political polarization intensified, culminating in the 2016 election of Donald Trump, as social divisions and crises of trust in institutions escalated. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic delivered a major health and economic shock, exposing the fragility of the healthcare system and deepening social inequality. This coincided with a contentious election that resulted in Joe Biden's victory. In January 2021, the storming of the Capitol building represented the most serious test of American democracy in decades. Subsequently, the country faced overlapping crises, including inflation, supply chain disruptions, a housing crisis, and racial tensions. Internationally, the war in Ukraine revived Cold War-era tensions and increased economic and military burdens. With the rise of artificial intelligence and the worsening climate crisis, domestic challenges have become even more complex. By 2026, the United States stands at a crossroads, a global superpower burdened by debt and internally divided, its future dependent as much on its ability to address its domestic crises as on its ability to confront external challenges. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.